Well, good morning, everyone. I invite you to take your seats. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar and interim rector of St. Bart's, and whether you are here in person on Park Avenue or joining us online at stbarts.org, it is my honor and my pleasure to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And this week we are having a conversation about our beloved building where we worship. And we are very honored to have with us Carole Bailey French, who is chair of St. Bartholomew's Conservancy. As Carole might explain, the Conservancy is a completely separate 501c3 from the parish that nonetheless works to preserve the envelope of the building that we so much love. Carole is a well-respected leader in the historic preservation field. She was named a living landmark by the New York Landmarks Conservancy a few years ago. Carole, thank you for all the work you do, and thank you for being here this morning.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. And of course, as I always say, the best part of being a living landmark is the living part. I'm going to talk to you this morning about the Stanford White triple portal. Whoops, oh dear. What did I do? There we go. Which I often begin this by asking for a show of hands as to how many in the room know that every time you walk through the main entrance to St. Bartholomew's, you're walking through a major work of art, a freestanding work of art, actually. I see a lot of familiar faces this morning, so I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But I say it's a freestanding work of art because it was actually transported here from its original installation on Madison Avenue. There we go. Sorry, I'll get used to this in a minute. There, you see it installed on Madison Avenue. But there are a number of very special things about the triple portal. The first one of which is that it bears the unique imprint of three major American architects. This is James Renwick Jr., who designed the Italianate Madison Avenue Church and also St. Patrick's Cathedral. This is Stanford White, who was commissioned initially to produce 3 pairs of bronze doors as a memorial to Cornelius Vanderbilt II, which subsequently became the triple portal. And this is Bertram Goodhue, who was the architect of this building and the church here. If I push this, I just wanted to show you something interesting here. This is the original rendering of St. Bartholomew's Park Avenue. And you see this here. This was intended, it was called the ciborium. I guess it's an inverted chalice. And both Goodhue and the then rector, Leighton Parks, wanted it there because Park Avenue and the adjoining area was developing rapidly, and banks and insurance companies were building these, copies of Italian palaces and whatever, and Leighton Parks and Goodhue thought it was very important to raise high the standard of spirituality amongst all this preoccupation with money. However, the vestry wouldn't pay for it. Which is kind of ironic, given at the time that the vestry was presided over the wealthiest Protestant church in all of North America. But they were very concerned about paying their bills, and so they said no. Also, the doors and ultimately the triple portal were the work of 3 very prominent sculptors of their day. This is Herbert Adams, Philippe Martigny, and here you see on the right pieces of the triple portal in his studio, and Andrew O'Connor. Andrew O'Connor did the middle doors and the tympanum. He was a protege of Daniel Chester French. Stanford White, Daniel Chester French of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. White wanted French to do the middle pair of doors. And he said no, he had too many commissions. He just couldn't possibly do it. But he had this wonderful protege working with him in whom he had great confidence. And at the end of the day, French gave O'Connor all the credit for what he did, which was not only the middle door and the tympanum, over it, but also the friezes that go across the front. But here again, you can see in the studio, this is the Christ the King over the front door. These people were all figures in something that's known as the American Renaissance in art and architecture. It was a period that stretched roughly between the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia and the entry of the United States into World War I. Also, there was a family that figured centrally in all of this, the Vanderbilts. Alice Gwynn Vanderbilt on the left. On the right, Alice Gwynn and her daughter Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, an artist, and of course, for whom the Whitney Museum is named today. They lived in the largest house in New York City by far, which is today occupied by Bergdorf Goodman, but that was the Vanderbilt's chateau, if you will. Cornelius Vanderbilt the Vanderbilt family were pillars of St. Bartholomew's from very early on, and Cornelius Vanderbilt was on the vestry for at least 2 decades. He died suddenly in 1899, and his wife, and I should say that it's rumored that he and Alice Gwynn met teaching Sunday school on the left, which is the original St. Bartholomew's in the Bowery. On the right, you can see the second St. Bartholomew's, 44th and Madison, with the triple portal installed there. Here we have the founders of the architectural firm McKim, Mead, and White, and Stanford White's very dear friend, lifelong friend, and collaborator, Augustus St. Gaudens, who I'll talk a bit about later, because I think he had quite an influence on the younger sculptors who worked on the doors and the tympanum. In White's case, what happened was that the bronze doors that he designed and that they executed, it turned out very quickly to everyone said, nah, these are way too ornate for the relatively simple facade of the Madison Avenue Church, which was a Lombardian, Northern Italian style. And so what to do? And White, as a young man in 1878, 2 years before the founding of the firm, had gone to Europe with McKim and St. Gaudens. They traveled around in Provence, and they came upon this, which is the Abbey Church of Saint-Gilles-du-Gard in Provence. It's a late 12th century structure. It was, at its time, a major pilgrimage site, as Saint-Gilles-du-Gard was a jumping off point, or sailing off point, to Jerusalem for the Crusaders and pilgrims. He sketched it. He wrote to his mother that it was the best thing he had seen in Europe. He sketched it and put the sketch away, hoping that someday someone would ask him to incorporate ask him to do something that could relate to this inspiration. And in 1901, Mrs. Vanderbilt did. This is kind of funny. This is the trip that the three of them made was later memorialized by St. Gaudens, who made this plaque, which is a replica of a medieval pilgrimage plaque that you got for having participated. And you see at the top, there's Stanford White, Charles McKim, St. Gaudens, and then right up, what did I do? Anyway, way up in the right-hand corner, you see the triple portal from Saint-Gilles-du-Gard. This, by the way, hangs in the bar of the billiard room at the Century Association on 43rd Street, also a Stanford White building. So, if you this is really quite extraordinary. In those days, of course, most of the faithful could not read, and so the Old and New Testament was taught by works of art like this. And also, you can notice that not all the columns are uniform, and I think that's probably because this church was built on the ruins of a Roman temple that they, had salvaged some of the columns. But the carving is just, the depth of it is just absolutely amazing. And really, this is, by the way, here we are. I keep losing this. Saint-Gilles, where are you? Is right there. Why? Here we are, right there. And at the time, it was very, very close to the sea. But of course, over the centuries, everything has silted up, and so now it's an inland place. This I just always thought was very interesting. The Crusaders, when they went to Jerusalem, were unhappy with the condition of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And so they fixed it up, and they enlarged it. That's the floor plan that you see at the bottom. And what's on top is the original floor plan of Saint-Gilles-de-Garde in France. This is a watercolor. It says proposed porch. The Saint-Gilles-de-Garde facade was also called a porch for St. Bartholomew's, done by Stanford White. And you can see that in providing a frame for the doors, that they Italianized the imagery considerably, and also added the Cipollito columns. There are 24 of them that we have out there, marching across it, all of them purposely made to coordinate with the green patina of the bronze doors. Mrs. Vanderbilt went to Europe. Well, after asking White to design the doors, she went to Europe to help out. And she took photos of various sets of bronze doors. She even mentions here, writing to her daughter, that the daughter was familiar with the Ghiberti doors, the gates of paradise that were on an exhibition here in New York about 10 or 12 years ago. But she was going to send him some other photos as suggestions. The Cipollito columns, by the way, are also found on San Marco in Venice. And there they have survived better than they have here, despite their exposure to sea air. Their original ones are still there. So these are the doors up close. This first page is taken from an article in Antiques magazine in 2002 by St. Bartholomew's archivist Percy Preston. And you can get it, you can access it online if you want to read more about it. But you can see, again, comparing it to the Saint-Gilles sculptures, it really is quite magnificent. We had a curator from the Met who pointed out to us that this was a period in which the American foundries had finally developed the ability to recreate a sculptor's vision in the same way that it was done in the Renaissance. That this, again, part of the American Renaissance in art and architecture. This is the central tympanum. Unfortunately, in its current condition, as you see, it has a number of losses. This was done by Andrew O'Connor. These are the other two by Adams and Martigny. And this is part of the frieze. This is, I believe, the Old Testament figures, and these are the new ones. You see the exit from to Egypt, the flight into Egypt there. These are 400 figures, and when you look at them closely, even in their somewhat deteriorated state, no two body stances or faces are repeated. 400 of them. It's really thoroughly amazing. Here's a closer look at it. The reason I think that that is so, or one possible reason anyway, is that Augustus St. Gaudens had an enormous influence on the next generation of sculptors in America, in that he tried to introduce into his work a sense of powerful motion. And I give you these two examples. This is his statue of Farragut in, where are we? Madison Square, I guess it is. That's the old Madison Square Garden, what looks like a church steeple in the background. And on the right, you're looking at the memorial to the 54th Regiment in the Civil War, which is on the Common in Boston. It was an all-black regiment with white officers, of course, the way things were in those days. But if you look at this, you see the sort of very powerful sense that these men are marching, and they're, that their rifle is weighing on their shoulders. That was something that, sorry. Okay, yeah. Let's say Gordon's contributed to the American aesthetic. Here again, we see the triple portal on Madison Avenue. Now, one has to say, why are we calling it a masterpiece hiding in plain sight? Well, first of all, it's not very attractive at the moment. It's pretty dirty. It has been eroded by water, particularly over the central set of doors, and by air pollution. Even when it was newly on Park Avenue, it was sitting next to a power station. But at the time that it was installed on Madison Avenue, it was also near a power station, which was burning soft coal. And it was installed in 1903, and by 1910, the Cipollino columns, Cipollino means little onion in Italian, and the columns, little onions peel, and the columns were beginning to peel. And the reason was that they were interacting with the carbon particulate in the air. So Stanford White, of course, was no longer alive in 1910, but McKim stepped in and ordered up a treatment called the Kafal process, which filled the pockmarks with wax. They heated the columns, put the wax in, and the wax congealed to stabilize everything. And it was a perfectly respectable. Yes. I don't know why. I guess I don't have a big enough ear. Yeah. No, I can't hold it. Let me put this back on. Sorry. Yeah, take the earring off. Okay. You took it away. All right. I don't want to get too close. Okay. McKim, it was a perfectly respectable process because it was reversible. You could heat the columns again and get the wax out of them. And at the time, it was thought that the wax would not remain there for a terribly long time. In fact, it's still there today, and that's one of the big challenges for the conservation work that's now going on. The New York Sun reported that St. Bartholomew's was moving to Park Avenue. Here, this is actually a shot of Madison Avenue in 1916, and you can see that what was originally a brownstone neighborhood where the church was situated was now full of commercial enterprises of one sort or another. And as a result, the St. Bartholomew's Foundation was subsiding, and the vestry was told that it would be cheaper to move than to try to shore up the foundation. So the Vanderbilts, of course, owned a lot of what is now Park Avenue, and they had I guess a lease, the Schaefer Brewing Company, which became the site for St. Bartholomew's. This, of course, was the centerpiece of it all, the opening of Grand Central Station in 1909 and putting the trains underground with a view to developing a grand boulevard like the boulevards in Paris, occupied on both sides by residences. It was until the Second World War. And here you can see the trains being put underground here and covered over. Up there in the left, you can see the power station next to the Schaefer Brewery. And here is where the Waldorf is now on that site. Mrs. Vanderbilt, of course, was heartbroken that they would be leaving the Madison Avenue Church where she had this memorial to her husband. So she volunteered to pay to have it dismantled and carted stone by stone and door by door over to Park Avenue to be reinstalled here. This is Leighton Parks, who was the rector at the time, who presided over the move from Madison Avenue to Park Avenue. I always laugh, and there's a portrait of him in the gallery back there, along with the portraits of other rectors, and he's the only one who isn't smiling. And I'm not sure why, although I have my suspicions. Anyway, he, as I said earlier, the vestry was concerned about the expense of the new site, and so he had to do some preaching to persuade the congregation to support the move financially. And he preached one very beautiful sermon in which he said, what a great privilege it is to place at the beginning of a great avenue a thing of beauty that will give joy and comfort to all who pass by. And he actually established what he called a ministry of beauty, which was intended to, first of all, finish the project and also to attract people to St. Bartholomew's who were now coming into the city through Grand Central and populating this area. This is the Grand Avenue. Now, Goodhue was told that the triple portal was coming along with the congregation. Goodhue, up until that time in his ecclesiastical work, was a committed Gothicist. This is the Church of the Incarnation on the left at 155th and Broadway, and on the right is St. Thomas, Fifth Avenue, which Goodhue and his then partner Cram restored after a fire in 1905. Here he has a totally Romanesque art object to contend with one big advantage here, that the slope of the land allowed the portal to be reinstalled on top of a flight of limestone steps, which is how the portal in Saint-Gilles-de-Garde was installed. So this is much closer to the original inspiration than it was on Madison Avenue. This Madison Avenue was a typical sort of European narrow sidewalk with the portal right, sort of flat down on it. This is a shot of the triple portal being dismantled for transportation to Park Avenue. And here it is being reassembled on Park Avenue. You can see on the right the truck with I think it's one of the lunettes in a frame. And over here on the left, you can see some of the columns lying down. This always makes me think of that photograph of Russian missiles in Cuba years and years ago. With, you have to really look hard to be able to see it. But and the power station, of course, was still there. There was no Waldorf. This is the so what happened? I'm getting kind of ahead of myself, and I've talked a little bit about the move to Park Avenue and so forth and so on. But coincident with that, it's important to understand that in the 20s, for sure, the triple portal lost all of its patrons. Sanford White, of course, had died in 1906. McKim was still alive, but he was gone by 1928. Goodhue died suddenly of a heart attack in 1924, and Leighton Parks retired in 1925. Most importantly, Mrs. Vanderbilt decamped to St. Thomas Park Avenue because she was very upset by a sermon that Leighton Parks preached in which he questioned the details of the virgin birth. Parks was the third generation of a group of theologians. The founder of the group was Phillips Brooks at Harvard, for whom, by the way, Trinity Boston was constructed. He was a great preacher. And their mission was to, shall we say, reduce the extreme differences between some of the biblical stories about, miracles and the resurrection of Lazarus and so forth and so on, and the findings of modern science in the 19th century. That was what they were devoted to. The rector of St. Bartholomew's at Madison Avenue was the next generation, James Greer, and then Leighton Parks was the third generation. Phillips Brooks is actually one of the four statues on the front of the area above the triple portal. So Goodhue was gone. His firm survived for a few years, and his successors finished as much as they could of the church. They built the community house. As you all know, you can see over here that on the wall there's a photograph of something of the church's social services headquarters on 42nd Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. I met someone recently whose family owns that site now, and they tell me that it's still referred to as the Bartholomew's building, even though it's not the same actual building that was there before. Anyway, the community house was put up in 1927 in recognition that the population served on 42nd Street had by that time begun to disperse to other places, mainly the outer boroughs. But there was a huge influx of young people in the 20s, and I have met a number of people who have told me that their parents only let them come to New York from Chicago or wherever if they would join the community club at St. Bartholomew's. It was considered a very attractive and safe place, and they would meet others of their own sort. The Goodhue's successors also put the dome on. Remember the picture we saw earlier of the dome that Goodhue wanted that was never built? This is kind of interesting. Goodhue had a significant practice in California and was commissioned by the state of California to design the pavilion for the United States Pan American exhibition in San Diego, in Balboa Park. His successors, needing a design for a dome, reached into the files and they pulled out the dome for Balboa Park and put it on top of St. Bartholomew's. We have had reason to lament that in the last 10 years or so, and remember that we had to spend $6 million to repair the dome from the ravages of air pollution and thawing and heating and thawing New York weather. The other thing that happened about the same time was that taste changed. The fascination with European Renaissance architecture and with Haussmann's Paris was supplanted by an enthusiasm for Art Deco. There were regular exhibitions in Paris every 10 years or so, showcasing the latest artistic enthusiasms. And in 1925, there was exhibition had very heavily emphasized Art Deco. And the parish had a lot of wealthy travelers who went to these exhibitions, and they came back and they formed an arts committee, and they decorated the interior of the church in the Art Deco style. This is Lee Lowry, the sculptor of the lectern And this is Hildreth Mayer, the muralist and mosaicist who had worked with Stanford White on the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, and she is responsible for, these are on the left you have the narthex, and then of course the apse in the nave. Meanwhile, the triple portal was sort of left to its own devices, and it began to deteriorate. You can see here the missing parts and the Christ nose and whatever. Also, the Cipollino columns, because as I mentioned, the Cafal wax was allowed to congeal, became really quite unattractive. And the limestone steps, this is said to be in part due to the rumbling of the trains under Park Avenue, but also there's a Con Edison conduit that comes in under the steps that causes temperature fluctuations. This is easily repairable. This is Indiana limestone. So, in 2022, the Conservancy engaged a company called Excelsior Art Services. They were responsible for the conservation of the obelisk, Cleopatra's Needle, in Central Park. And the principal is Matthew Riley, who you see there. We engaged them to conduct a thorough evaluation of what would be required to conserve and preserve the triple portal. They gave us a report about 2 years later, and I just want to read one thing from it that I think is really heartening. They wrote, at its core, St. Bartholomew's triple portal embodies a singular expression, the confluence of multiple generations of architectural and artistic brilliance, the veracity of its historic materials and technologies, and its sumptuous composition that is at once subtle and powerful. The triple portal's status as an irreplaceable work of art is undeniable. Its merits a conservation approach equally skilled, thoughtful, and timeless. And what that means, basically, is that in conserving it, you do your very best, as much as you possibly can, to preserve the original materials, the composition, and the imprint of the artists, architects, and sculptors who were originally the original creators of it. Since the Excelsior report, which is here, was presented, shortly thereafter, the church and the Conservancy got together and appointed a joint committee to manage the conservation of the triple portal. And we have hired a company called Cultural Heritage Conservation, based in Chatham, New York, the principal of which is a person named Amanda Trianons, who has many credits to her name. She's currently also working on the slurry wall at Ground Zero, and is a professor, adjunct professor at Columbia University, where she teaches about stone and metal conservation. So there we are. Our hope is that we will begin to work on the triple portal in earnest next spring. But prior to that, I have breaking news, and that is that we have just gotten approval to create what I'll call a pop-up lab in the North Chapel, to which we will move. We will bring 2 columns from the triple portal to be examined and treated. One of the things that I'm sort of fond of saying, the columns are like little kids. They have measles, chickenpox, whooping cough, and whatever, but they don't all have the same disease. And so they need to be brought inside into a dust-free, weatherproof environment, examined all the way around. One thing we may find is that when they're turned around, that the other side of them is in much better condition. We don't think so, but it could happen. And then they need to try several different methods of removing the Cafal wax, which has hardened almost to the consistency of concrete. So that's going to take place, I hope, maybe beginning in late October. And visitors will be welcome. Certainly parishioners are welcome to poke their heads in and watch what's going on and ask questions and whatever. The other big development is that after we did the conservation evaluation, the report was very helpful to us in prompting a major grant from the National Park Service from its Save America's Treasures program. We got it almost $750,000, which is exactly what we asked for, which is a marvel when that happens, when you get everything you ask for. And so we're now, the estimate for the triple portal is conservation fully is $4.5 million, and we're just a little more than $1 million shy of reaching that goal and are working very hard at the moment. So just before we have questions, I would like to ask your patience just a little bit longer. I'd like to show you a film that we have made to publicize the project. Our executive director, Connie Evans, is there, and she and Gil Gilbert, a documentary filmmaker, are mainly responsible for what I'm about to show you.
A masterpiece of American art hiding in plain sight, the distinctive entrance of the National Historic Landmark, St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue, the magnificent triple portal designed by legendary Gilded Age architect Stanford White, with bronze doors and sculptures created by some of the most important artists of the era. Thousands of New Yorkers and visitors walk by it every day, but do they see this spectacular work in the midst of busy days and lives? In 1900, Alice Gwynne Vanderbilt and her daughter, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, commissioned Stanford White of the prominent architectural firm McKim, Mead & White to design a new set of bronze doors for the second home of St. Bartholomew's Church. Designed by James Renwick and one of New York's foremost Gilded Age houses of worship, the church was located on Madison Avenue and 44th Street. White's new set of doors, later known as the Triple Portal, was created as a memorial to Mrs. Vanderbilt's husband, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, who died in 1899. Mr. Vanderbilt, a parishioner of St. Bartholomew's for most of his life, was generous with both his money and his time.
As the design for the doors took shape, it became obvious, however, that their rich decoration would be at odds with the relative simplicity of Renwick's original entrance. The only way to solve it, White and the church agreed, was to design a completely new entrance, which White decided to base on a sketch he had made as a young man of the triple-arched entry to the Romanesque 12th century abbey church of Saint-Gilles-du-Garde in Provence.
At age 25, while traveling in France with Charles McKim and Augustus St. Gaudens, White had in fact written to his parents, "At Saint-Gilles, a little out-of-the-way town, and in it the best piece of architecture in France, the triple marble porch of the church."
White surrounded each of the sculptured bronze doors with limestone arches, richly decorated with friezes and tympanum bas-reliefs separated by delicate columns of colorful Cipollino marble. It was a magnificent architectural coup, you could say, an imposing, not to say ornate entrance that conferred on Renwick's old church a whole new level of monumentality. Mrs. Vanderbilt was delighted. She wrote to Stanford White that she was sure it must be the opinion of everyone who sees the completed work that it is very beautiful and appropriate, and that it will mark an era in American art.
You have this extraordinary Renaissance motif. I mean, this is something that Raphael would recognize instantly. And then you have this sort of incredible combination of sort of Greek and Roman elements sitting on top of that delicious red marble. I mean, where did that come from?
To create his vision of its prominent three-portal entrance for St. Bartholomew's in New York, White chose 3 distinguished sculptors to design the bronze doors and their surrounding sculpture: Herbert Adams, Philip Martini, and Andrew O'Connor, with oversight by Daniel Chester French. White drew the outline of the doors, showing the relative size and location of the panels, and gave each sculpture wide latitude in decorating them. The bronze doors, carved limestone, and marble sculpture would depict 400 figures with no two alike, from both the Old Testament and New Testament.
This was a moment in American sculpture when the technology of bronze casting had finally emerged in this country at the highest level, and artists were really delighting in experimenting and working in close collaboration with the foundry to produce really high quality, ambitious products, and this is what you see in these doors. So when someone looks at the triple portal, it's hard to imagine how many hands were involved in producing this one singular facade work of art, from the marble carvers to the bronze casters to the artists themselves, the architect. It was truly a collaborative process.
In 1914, noted New York ecclesiastical architect Bertram Goodhue was commissioned to design the third and current St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue, with criteria to include bringing the beloved triple portal to the new site and incorporating it into the Romanesque design we know today. Goodhue, calling it perhaps the most beautiful thing of its kind in America, was pleased to have the opportunity to incorporate White's striking entry into his own facade. St. Bartholomew's Church would make a visual impact on the city, giving joy, peace, and comfort to those who pass by.
To move a piece like the triple portal is a major undertaking. That it was considered worth doing speaks to the importance of it as a work of art and as an essential element of St. Bartholomew's identity.
So Goodhue, in a way that he is famous for as both a sculptor and an architect, was able to blend right into the portal, and in fact he himself felt that the portal was a masterpiece, not only on Park Avenue, but within the city, within the nation, and beyond. And he was right. His church is a masterpiece as well. The two are married.
St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue opened in 1918. The community house was constructed in 1928, and the iconic St. Bartholomew's Great Dome was added in 1930. Today sees the people experience this American masterpiece every day, some passively, some knowingly, and many simply notice a great work of beauty in the midst of busy New York days.
The preservation movement has unfolded in response to certain buildings like Penn Station being torn down in the 1960s. I think that we're operating at a much higher level of consciousness and appreciation, especially in the last few years. People are much more aware of the presence and the significance and the symbolism of public sculpture, and the same goes for magnificent public buildings in New York, from New York Public Library to the Metropolitan Museum to St. Bartholomew's. These are all buildings that are used, if you will. People are coming in and out of them. They're actually coming in and out of works of art, very consciously conceived works of art.
What I hope is that people will realize that there is this extraordinary thing on Park Avenue that really bears a very close and deliberate and leisurely inspection, because there isn't really anything like it in New York.
And we're very fortunate to have assembled a team that represents the most exemplary stewardship through St. Bartholomew's Conservancy, to be able to ensure not only a deep and rich understanding of the portals, how we continue to ensure that every element of the portal has a safe passage far into the future, a cultural heritage icon that will live on for generations.
Long recognized as a New York City landmark, to create such an exquisite object more than a century ago, was its intention to be noticed by all who encountered it, or to sit quietly through time as a private, dignified memorial? How does a perception of such historic public works of art evolve through decades and centuries? Do we value them sufficiently to invest in preserving them for future generations? And will we continue to create new ones of equal greatness?
So unfortunately, we are out of time.
Yes,
No time for questions, but I think it was worth it to see the video. I'm sure Carole will stay up here and be happy to answer any questions that you have if you want to come up after the presentation.
Yes, absolutely.
Please join me in thanking Carole Bailey French.
Welcome. You're welcome.
We're so grateful, Carole, for the work that you're spearheading and for your willingness to be with us today. And thank you all for being here, too. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m.